Kumihimo is the Japanese name for braid, and I think we must remember that the braid, in fact, is universal. It's not just confined to Japan. And this universal development of braids happened in all hunting and gathering settlements all around the world. And the need for the use of these braids depended on the geographical placement and the natural vegetation that was available in that location. Slings developed as a weapon, a hunting weapon, and that was universal right throughout the world. Slings are not just confined to Peru. Elizabeth Wayland Barber has written a book called 20,000 Years of Women's Work. She reckons it could go back to 25,000 years of women's work. Now, what that means is that textiles have a long, long history. And I would suggest that braids go beyond that, because braids were the first textiles, as with baskets, that started all the weaving process. So we're going back a long way, and of course that is no written history at all for this. Today we're talking about braids from Japan, and we're looking at braids being made on a Maru Dai as the most simplest of these tools. We know that about 1824 the first formalized instructions for Maru Dai appeared in Japan. A question that remains unanswered at the moment is, where did the Maru Dai come from? And we also know that hair braiding that is made in Scandinavia to this day dates back way 300, 400 years. Now, was it development from the hair braiding stool that the Japanese Maru Dai was developed? Hello, I'm Rodrick Owen. This is the wooden Maru Dai, as you can see in front of me, and the one to the side here is made from foamboard. These are the bobbins which I've wound silk on. Here we have bobbins of different sizes, and I'd like to talk to you about why they're different sizes. They range from 240 grams on this one, where we've got 84 strands of silk. This is a 100-gram bobbin where we've got 42 ends. And then we have three others, an 85 with 28 ends, a 70-gram with 14, and then we have the tiny one, the 35-gram with just 5 or 6 threads there, where we make fine braids. Now, the size of the bobbin will depend on what you want to make. In Japan, a standard aubergine is made with 42 ends of silk per bobbin. So that would be the 100-gram bobbin. When you're making an 8-strand braid, you would use the 240-gram bobbin. The whole thing with the braids that we're going to make in the Western society is going to be about how we want to use it. So there's no right answer for this. It always depends on what you want to do and the materials you're using and the application you're going to put it to. So what you've got to do is approach braiding with no one right answer, because there isn't one. And the important thing behind all this is to make samples, lots and lots of samples, and then you get the right answers. I'd like to introduce you to a table that appears in my book. Now, if I open the page here, you'll be able to see it. There are two braids on the page. There's a thicker one here, which is made from wool and chenille. This I used a 100-gram bobbin, and because they were fatter threads. And if I was to make a thicker braid still, I used a 240-gram bobbin, and which would have the equivalent to what we saw earlier, the 84 strands of silk on it. So that's sort of a guideline to the sort of thickness of the threads that you would use. Over here I have a much finer braid. It was made with 35-gram bobbins, and you can see that there's a great big difference between the sizes. Now, when you begin to make a braid, you have to decide what sort of bobbins you buy. You don't have to buy all these sizes, because you wouldn't have an immediate use for that. You have to decide what you want to use the braid for. My recommendation to most people when they ask me is, well, I'll discuss that and say, well, do you want to make fine braids for jewellery, or you're making thicker braids? I had somebody ask me the other day about regalia for church use, and they were describing that. We ended up with an 85-gram bobbin because they wanted to make something a little more substantial. So again, it's a question of it depends on what you want to do. 70-gram bobbins give you the finer braid, which you might use for the jewellery. 85 grams gives you something a little more substantial. In addition to the Maru Dai and the bobbins, this is the other pieces of equipment that you will need. There's an S-hook here and a knitting needle, which we will talk about later on when I come to use them, so you'll see how they're practically used. And the other thing I want to talk about is the bobbins. Right, you have the weight of the bobbins. Now, that's a tension. It's pulling against the centre hole. What you need to have, of course, are these fishing weights that are here. So that, in fact, I would recommend as a good starter to have 8-ounce weights, 3 of them, 3 4-ounce, 2 2-ounce, and probably 2 or 3 1-ounce weights. And they all go, well, according to the weight you need, into this bag. Now this is a counterbalance bag, and this counterbalance bag will be attached to the Maru Dai here. Now I'm going to put the weights in here that I'm going to use, and you'll see how it affects the shape of the bag. And I would recommend that you do not use stiff fabric. Use a softer fabric, for as I pick this up you'll see that it will be a nice bundle around the fishing weights. A stiffer bag will in fact just make it rigid and won't give that softness to it. The tie that you use for the bag is important. I've seen a lot of people use very thin cords, and what that does is it bites into the braid. The less weight you have in the bag, the tighter, firmer the braid is. And that would be like this one. If I just hold this braid and I pull on it, I can't make it stretch. It's very, very rigid, so there'll be very little weight in the bag. Whereas if I hold this braid where I've got a lot of weight in the bag, can you see how elastic that is? How it moves as you do that. So there's a lot of weight, gives you a longer stitch and a more supple braid. You will also need a tape measure, what most of you are going to have, a larger pair of scissors, sharp scissors, for cutting through your tassels when you finish off a braid, and a smaller pointed pair of scissors for getting in to snip out the smallest thread possible. And the seam ripper, we use that to unzip the tie, the temporary ties we put on the end of the braid. And you would also need warping posts, which I'll explain to you when we come to make our first warp. If you decide to make a foam board Maru Dai before you decide to purchase a wooden one, you'll need 3 pieces of foam board. These are 20 by 30 inches. And you'll also need these other parts I have here. These are film canisters which are used as bobbins, and as you can see there's no cost to that at all. And you'll need 9/4 and 1 dime to go into the canisters to be the weight for the bobbin. So we put these inside like that. You then put the cap on top, and then what we do is put some masking tape around them to stop the thread slipping on the slippery surface, and we put an elastic band on to prevent the thread slipping off this smooth end. To assemble the foam Maru Dai, you will also need this packing tape and an X-Acto knife. And let's have a look at the finished article we've got here. There it is. We've got 4 sides, 4 panels that we cut. These are 16 by 10. And out of 2 of them, we cut a little, what I call a sentry box hole. And this is a panel that's cut out, which is 5 by 10. There is also a 16-inch diameter top, which has a 2-inch diameter hole cut in the center. The sides are taped up with the packing tape like this, you can see. And then when you've got it all assembled together as the four sides, you cut the base and assemble that. When you have the sides and the base of the stand assembled together, you then center it onto the top. And there you have a complete unit. Now this is great for kids. Kids love to do this, and I use them when I go into schools. We do a whole project of making these Maru Dais and collecting the film canisters from the film processing unit, so the children are all very actively involved in that. And it makes a very good braid in a very simple, inexpensive way. There are so many different yarns we can use. And here on this table, well, we've got lots of different colours, and we've got a fair selection of different types. Now let's start and have a look at these. This is 5-2 pearl cotton, and as you can see, it's just quite a thick cotton if I lay it over my arm like that. And you might even use this as one thread per bobbin. I'd then check that, and I'd wind two together like this, and just look at it again and think, oh yeah, well I could use two ends of that per bobbin. Depends on what I'm going to do. There we are, we've got that word again, it depends. Here's some 10-2 cotton. This has got a lovely luster to it. And this would, I'm sure, make a very good braid. If I twist some of this together, we'll just see what it looks like. Now that's two ends twisted together. It's not very thick. I like to use this about 8 or 10 ends to a bobbin when I'm using it. That's 4 ends, and here we've got 8 ends, just in that little bit, that extra thickness there. And then of course it depends on what you're going to use it for. And in the front here we've got some other pearl cottons of different counts. And we also have some cotton floss. Now I've not used this cotton floss before, but it's quite thick, and it would be very good for learning to start making your first braids. I've got some green here. If I just lay that over my hand, you'll be able to see it like that. That's 2 ends of bobbin. Now I think I'd use 1 end of bobbin to see what sort of sample I got from it. We have some linen. Now linen makes a strong braid, really good for horse leads, dog leads, llama leads, anything that's going to need strength to it, skipping ropes. Very good for that sort of thing. And now we have a material I've never used before. I don't know, I know this yarn. So what I'd have to do is make lots and lots of different samples to show, the result of it. And then we got some lovely sparkly stuff. Now look at this. Look at the colour in that. And if you put it together with something else, if you just have sparkly all over it, it sort of cancels out. So you have to put it through with another yarn. And I'll twist that together with something else. Now, this is wool. Now, I've used a lot of wool in my samples previously, and it's very good. It's got very supple, and it does act a bit like silk. You've got the softness, and it pulls in as you're making the braid. So don't be frightened to use knitting yarns. They work, or knitting rayons. And talking of rayons, here's some here. Now, this dyes up very well. A bit on the difficult side to control, but as long as you tie it off tight, which I'll show you later on when we're doing the warps, this works indeed very well indeed. It's got a lovely sheen on it. Now, let me just twist a few things together. I've got this sparkly stuff here, and I'd be wanting to see what it looked like. So if I take the 2 yarns there, fold them in half again, and just twist them that, I'd like that. That's really nice. So I got 4 ends there, and I'd make up a sample of that and see how it worked out in practice. And here's this cotton floss, and if I wind it off with a bit of this woolen yarn here, you got the contrast. You've got wool and cotton with a high sheen together, so you can see that effect. So you've got a fluffiness with the wool, and a sort of a very smooth surface with the cotton floss, which gives a lovely contrast. And And in this corner, we have the Japanese silk. Now, you can see from the shade card it comes in a lot of colours, and you can see from the silk in this tray that we also have a lot of bright colours. Wonderful stuff, Japanese silk. It comes in 2.7 metre lengths, and there's 2 ropes to each little packet, and they're very easy to divide. I'm just going to divide one rope. You've got the 2 ropes there together. In this rope there's 42 ends of silk. When you make a braid with this, out of a yield of 2.7 metres, you get 1.5 metres. So you lose about 40% when you're making a braid. And they also do a silver and gold metallic yarn. We've just been looking at a lot of different colours and different yarns. Now we can look at some finished items. Here you can see the spiral braid made up in the wool that's here on the table, in red and white and blue and grey, which is similar to the colour there. And here we've got some Calibri cotton floss. Now this braid here is similar. It's not, it's silk floss, but they make up very much the same. It's a beautiful, smooth finish to braid. This is great for curtain tiebacks. This is a 10-2 cottons, which, if you remember, I twisted together to see what it looked like. That's quite attractive, isn't it? Now, these braids here were all made with a similar cotton, so you can see a whole variety. These are 24-strand braids, and you can see that they've all come up really nice and smooth with this type of yarn. We also looked at the sparkly yarn, and I've got a sample here that I've shown before with a rayon fibre, and last of all, in the yarns that I've got here was the linen. Now this was a length of linen braid. It's what I made up some time ago, and it does make such a strong braid. It's very good for that sort of use that I suggested: skipping ropes, llama leads, horse leads, anything that's got to have a lot of support to it. Be good on boats too, I would think. Yeah, good for tying on boats. Now I've got something we didn't have any yarn for. This is a ribbon. It's an off-ray ribbon. It scrunches up as you make it, but it doesn't make any difference to the effect. It makes a very good braid. And this was made by a Japanese woman. She put a little perfume in it when she sent it to me as a gift. And here lastly we have braids made from wire. And as you can see, perhaps if I just flex that a bit, that it's flexible and tight and firm. It's a dyed copper yarn that's available both in Britain and in America. And here's another example of another yarn. Well, this is a tighter structure. This is an 8-strand braid, very similar to one that we'll be looking at when we begin to warp up, which will be the next thing we'll be showing you. We're now going to prepare a warp for our first project. And the braid that we're going to make is an 8-strand spiral braid. And on the page here we have 4 A's and 4 B's. This is the setting up diagram for the braid. And when we come to make it, we'll be using the 2 diagrams below here, which is step 1 and step 2. Now you can see that there's a length of braid here which is 9.5 inches long, and there's approximately 4.5 inches for each tassel here. So we're making a tassel braid with tassels at both ends. Now I made this from a 26-inch warp, so I'm now going to wind on and show you how I wind on a 26-inch warp. I like to use these warping posts that are on the table here. You can also use a warping frame, a warping board. I'm going to select 2 colours here. Now what I've got to decide is how many ends for each bobbin before I start. So I'm going to just take the loose thread from this colour here and twist it together and put it on my hand like that and say, well, that's 2 strands twisted together. I think I want this sample a bit thicker. So I'm going to now twist it again and say, oh, I think I'll have 4 ends a bobbin. That will give me a decent sample. And I also choose 2 contrasting colours, because in that way I can clearly see the pattern to begin with. Once you've established a group of samples, you can then sort of begin to add in extra colours or mix colours together and blend them. So first of all I'm going to do is to tie on this thread onto the first post. I call this post A and this is post B. Now there's many ways to tie on. You can just tie it on, if you like, with what we in England call a reef knot, or you might call a flat knot or square knot in the States, and I've got it secure. Now there's a pot under the table here, and I'm going to drop that ball into the pot so it won't wander about the floor, and I'm going to wind this warp round the post like that. Now each time I come round the post here, I'm winding for 2 bobbins, 1 bobbin in my right hand and 1 bobbin in my left hand. So I've wound on 2 ends at the present moment. I call them ends per bobbin. And now that's 3 ends and 4 ends. And when I've got the 4 ends wound on, I just twist this in my finger like this and slip it over the post, and that secures it. So that's the first colour. Now I'm going to put the warp on for the second colour, and I'm going to drop that in the pot again and keep the other one company, and tie this one on. And again I'm going to wind round here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that's 2 bobbins I've wound on. No, that's 4. Okay. I've got my fingers here at the point of where I'm going to put the tassel for the first tassel, so we're going to bind this off eventually. Now, what I need to do here is to twine and separate the threads for each bobbin. And I'm going to use this white cotton cord that I have here. And I'm first of all going to do the ones in the front so you can see what's happening, and then I'll do the ones at the back. And I'm going to hold those and twist them together like that. And now I'm going to twist them again, but this time I'm going to catch in the brown threads like that. So I've secured 2 bobbins of threads. Now I'm going to do that on the back ones, and I'll do that slightly different place so that I don't get confused when I am trying to put on the next 2 bobbins. Here we are, that's the second one done. So both have been twined. I'm just going to push them down out the way and separate those. And now I'm going to warp on, again, some more pink threads. So I'm now going to come round with another 4 turns. There's the 4th turn. And always check it. Don't believe you've done 4. You must check it. Nothing worse than getting your warp on and found you miscounted. There's the light colour. Now I'm going to take the darker colour and put that on. But before I do so, I'll finish the twining here, so I have separated and captured it. So I'm going to twine that and separate it like that, turning it. Now I've got to catch the pink threads in that tie there, like that, so that it's here like this. Can you see that? And now I'm going to do the one at the back. Now I'm going to put on the darker thread for the last 2 bobbins. We've got 1, turn, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to turn this around the end post to secure it. Again, I just twist the threads like that, slip it over the post and pull it tight. Now I can secure the last bobbin here, like that. And then what I've do now is to do a half knot. So I'm just going to bring that through as if I was going to do a a securing knot, but just do one. Right, I don't want to do a full knot on there. And now I can twine this last one and catch that in like that, and again do a half knot. The next thing I have to do is to secure the tassel, which I'm going to do with another bit of thread here. Now I usually make this quite long, and I'm going to fold it in half like this, so that I've got a short end and a long end together. We're now going to secure with this long and short end the tassel, and I'm going to, by eye, judge it to be a tassel of this length. And I've put the short and long end there, and you can see that they've come through the loop, and the loop was put through underneath, so the loop was facing me. I'm now going to fold the short end along the warp and bind off with this longer end here, so that it comes round. I do this quite tight, especially if you're using slippery yarns, because they'll just pull out when you come to dress the Maru Dai. I'm now going to do a half hitch on here, and just to secure it, and hold it tight like that. And now we'll move the binding along and mount that on with a half hitch again, approximately that distance, because we're going to put a knitting needle through between the two bindings to set it on the Maru Dai. And that's, you'll see the reason why when we come to do that. And there's the binding again. I finish it off with again with a half hitch. This temporary binding will be cut off at when the braid comes to be finished off, and the proper finish will be done then. And now I'm going to cut this off with short ends so they don't get in the way when I'm going to be working. And there we are, we have our first warp, which we can now cut off at post A. So I'm just going to pull these up the post. I usually stick my scissors on the post like that, so all the loops come off onto the point of the scissors, cut through there, and just trim the longer ends so they're approximately all the same length. And there we have the first warp, separated with the ties and bound off for a tassel. This is the warp preparation for our second project. Now, our second project only has a tassel at one end. If we look at this braid that's on the table here, you can see there's one tassel at one end. If you follow it around here, you can see there's a holding cord, but that's only a temporary move, and we'll just end up with a finger point end, a blunt end on our braid. This is a setting up pattern. It's different from the last one. The colours are arranged differently. The two A's are on the east and west side, and the B's are on the north and south. And here we have two steps to make the braid again, step 1 and step 2. Here we have a series of rings, and these are all attachments you can include when you're making a braid with a blunt end like this. Now, you remember I spoke when we were looking at the yarns about this fibre and using only one end of bobbin, and this is what we're going to do for this. So I'm going to take first of all the green warp, and this is a very simple warp to do, and I'm going to tie it off on this post with just an overhand knot like that, a flat knot, and secure it. And as I've only got a short warp to do, I'm just going to hold this in my hand and unwind it like this and bring it round once. Well, that's 2 bobbins. And here's the other 2 like this. So that's a very quick one to do. And I've no need this time to separate each bobbin, because it'll be very clear to see what they are. So I'm just going to cut this and then secure it on the end, and I'll do that again by twisting the thread round like this and slipping it over the end and then pulling it tight. Now I'll do the yellow thread in exactly the same way. Loosen some off before I start. and tie it off on the post. There's your square knot. And I'm going to wind it round with 2 loops at this end of the post, on this post here. Again, cutting the thread as I come to the end and securing it here. I can secure that in a different way just by doing a half hitch, because I'm going to cut it off the post in a minute. Now I've got to secure that end whatever I do, because I need to put a holding cord on there. And I've cut a length of the same yarn, folded it in half, and then slipped it like that with the loop and the 2 ends evenly together. Put the 2 ends through the loop to make another lark's head, and to pull that round onto the end of the post like that and pull it tight. Now the whole warp's secure. Now while I have the thread there, I'm under tension. I'm also going to put an overhand knot in that to create a little gap between the 2 knots. That is where the knitting needle is going to go through. I'm now going to cut the warp off again, tidy up the loose ends. And what I can do now is I've got the warp, it's not very tight. I can slip one of these rings on, look. Just push it through here and bring it down there, and that can stay on the warp with the holding cord, so that when I start the braid, the ring's going to be in place at the end of the braid like that. This is the 3rd project, and this project is going to be making a braided loop. And if you have a look on the table here, you'll see a lot of braids that I've collected. All these come from Japan except for the 3 woolen ones here. And I think it's a fantastic finish for jewellery. It's just one of my favourites, and I'm really overboard about it. It's a really good one. This braid is just one colour, and I love it. I love the blue and the way the light and shade and texture of this braid. This braid I did with 2 colours, and I changed the setting up diagram that you're looking at, and I alternated it A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B all the way on the 4 sides. And when I've made it, I thought, I don't like that. So I would make that braid again, and I'd keep it as an example of something that I didn't like too much, but I wouldn't do again. And here we have the setting, the steps, step 1 and 2 for making the braid. Now I'm going to wind this warp off on the posts, and it's very simple to do. I want 8 strands, and the first thing I'm going to do is make the warp to braid this loop at the end separately from making the braid that runs down here. So I'm going to tie off on this one post again. I'm going to drop the ball into the pot under the table and come round so that I've got a warp that's 2 ends, 3 ends, 4, 5, 6, 7, this will be 8, and I'm coming back here to finish off on this post, again twisting that round, putting over the post and putting it tight. Now you'll notice here that I've got one continuous warp. There's 8 ends, and I'm going to make a braided loop with this, and I'm going to cut it off first. So whereas before we had one set of bobbins on this side and one set of bobbins on the other side, we're now going to have, let me just trim this off. Because we want to make a braided loop to begin with, to begin the braid before we make a braid with the rest of the threads, we're going to just off-center it so that one side is longer than the other. So what I'm going to do is hold that there and bind it off. Now before I do that, I need to just secure this on here. I'll trap it on my thigh there and just keep a note of where that was. Take some thread. And I'm going to bind this off as we did before for the tassel end. So I want something that's quite long, and I'm going to put a short and a long end together as I did before, and put the loop underneath the warp towards me, and then put the long and the short end through the loop like that. And secure it at the point I said I was going to put it. Now I'm going to bind it off tight. Now I've got it under tension trapped on my thigh here, and I'm going to wind it round and bind it once, twice, and I'm going to put a half hitch in on the third turn. And now I'm going to put the second tie in, like that, and bind it off a second time. Pull it tight and put a half hitch in, and secure it like that, and cut off the loose ends. Now that's my warp that I have to make the loop with. The space between the two ties that I put here is where the knitting needle will be placed when it's mounted on the Maru Dai. The space between the last tie here, my left hand, and my right fingers, will be where the braid for the loop is going to be made. So when the loop is made, it will be joined together as a braided loop like that. And I have to do that separately before I make the rest of the braid with the rest of the warp like this. And this we'll show you later on. This is our fourth warping project, and it's going to be for a loop that is wrapped. And this will be the final project before we go on to look about how to set up the Maru Dai and to make the braids. Let's have a look at what we're going to do. On the sheet here we have a braid, which is a flat braid with a green loop on the end, and you can see that the setting up for this braid is a little different to the others. The A threads are not all opposite each other, they're staggered with the B threads in between. I got some loops here which I had made previously, and they were samples which I started and I didn't like them, so I took them off the Maru Dai, but have kept them to show you. This loop was too tight and too small for the braid, I felt. This one, you can see the pink loop is miles too big. And these two show you the wrapping in progress. So that's what we're going to do with the warp that I've got lying on my knee here. And then we'll interlace the threads. Now I'm going to use really thick yarn here. And I'm going to do this without warping posts. So you can just fold the yarn like this, and I've cut it this length and put the other end down here, and now I've got 8 ends for the bobbins to go on at this end, and the wrapping will go on where my left finger is here. So I'm going to cut the loops here to free all the loops, and so that I've just got loose ends. And then I'm going to fold it in half and find the centre, and then take it slightly off centre like that before I begin the wrapping. So I'm just going to put that on my knee while I prepare the yarn for the wrapping. And I'm choosing a yellow colour here, and I'm going to cut this a bit longer than I would normally do, because it's surprising how much yarn that you're going to use, a thin yarn like this, to wrap the loop. So I've cut it extra long. Now remember how we've started all the other ones. We're not going to do it, but well, we're going to have a long end and a short end. So I'm wrapping here, and it's a long warp, so I have to keep on turning it around like this and casting it out there. and I keep on wrapping and casting the thread. I don't do it too tight and I don't do it too loose, because I'm going to pull on the end of this thread to close the loop after I've done all the wrapping and secured the loose end in that loop. So now I'm turning it, and I'm just going to put that under my knee to keep it under tension so I can hold it better. And as I move it along like that, I'm just going to push it down on, keep it tight, and just run my finger and thumb over it to smooth it down. That's getting near a length that could be useful. Just smooth that down again a bit. Remember I said to you it takes up a lot more warp than you think it will to do this. Now I'm going to put this end through the loop here, like that. And I'm going to just tug on this end here to secure that loop. And what will happen is I'll pull that loop part the way into the wrapping like that and put it quite tight. And what I've now got is the loop hidden, and there's two ends joined together under there. So now I've made a wrapped loop which I can bring round like that. And again I could put a ring on there like I did for the blunt end. So that could be a ring here, and you could have it to pull on against like that. Now I then have to cut off my ends so they're hidden. This is why you want some sharp scissors and pointed scissors, so you can cut those off close so they don't show. And what I'm going to do now is to finger weave the two sides together. I've secured the wrap loop with this yellow cord to the leg of the Maru Dai to keep it under tension. And I've also arranged the threads in the way that we're going to set the warp up when we put it on the Maru Dai. So we've got light, dark, light, dark. I'm now going to interlace these threads together to lock the wrapped loop so it won't come undone. And I'm going to do that in the same method as I would do if I was making an American Indian finger woven braid. So I'm going to take the top thread between my two fingers like that and move it down to the side of the lower light thread and pick that up between my finger and my thumb. And you can see there's a cross where the two threads have interlaced. And then I will repeat that with each of the colours. So I now do the dark one, picking that up in my two fingers, and coming down and picking the bottom one up in my finger and my thumb. So I've now got two threads crossed. Now working with the last light thread and picking that with my finger, and finger and thumb brings the one up from the bottom to the top. Now the last one, picking with my two fingers, so you've got the four threads there together, and then the bottom one I'm just going to put in place like that. Now I've interlaced all the threads. I can push up the threads together like that to lock them into the loop, and that secured the loop tight. The loop will then be pushed down the centre hole of the Maru Dai, and the bobbin will be put on these warps. We're now going to prepare the Maru Dai to make our first braid. This will be the spiral braid for which we prepared the warp with the cream and brown threads. But I've also prepared another warp, which is the green and blue one, and I think I'm going to prefer to use this. The reason I'm going to use this one is because this is the finished braid that we're going to make with tassels at both ends, but I wasn't satisfied with the way this came out, and I want to try a different combination of weights for this. So this is the warp I will use. I'd like to draw your attention to some braids which I have done earlier and show you the difference that the counterbalance bag makes. Here we have the yellow and orangey braid, which used 540 grams in the counterbalance bag, and you can see it's an elongated spiral, and the braid would be very, very supple. And all these are different grades of different weights, to the other extreme where this was used 180 grams. And it's a very tight spiral. If you compare the two from there to there, you can see the difference. And if I draw your attention again to the tags that I've got here, where I keep a record of everything that I do, the yarn I use, the warp length, the finish length, what I had left over that I didn't use, the bobbin weight and the counterbalance weight. So I've got an 8 ounce, a 2 ounce and a 4 ounce. So I've got 14 ounces going into the counterbalance bag, and again I'm going to use the 70 gram bobbins here. Now the first step that I have to take is to prepare the bobbin ties. Now I've cut these 36 inches long. There's a reason for that, and before I tie the overhand knot in the ends here that hold them together, I just want to tell you why it's important. I'm just going to take that off there and put the loose ends there, and so it hangs down, and you can see where the bobbin's going to go here. And I've tied a little bit of cotton on my leg. It's 7.5 inches from the underside of the Maru Dai to here. And whatever size Maru Dai you're using, this is the length you should let your bobbins down to so that they don't tangle together. Now I'm going to tie this overhand knot like this. I'm going to hold the two ends together and just form a loop and push through the two loose ends like that, pulling them together. You see how that loose end. Now I don't want long ends. I want those to be as short as possible so they don't tangle with the yarn that I'm using. So I'll put that one down, and then I'll show you how I put it onto the bobbin. Now here's the bobbin. This is the 70 gram bobbin, and I'm going to take the knotted end. Remember I told you that most of the knots we're going to use are in fact either going to be lark's heads, and here's another lark's head, just done an overhand knot in the end, and I slip this onto the bobbin like this and pull it tight against there. So now we have our 8 bobbins all prepared. It's really important when you're making samples that you see the difference between the weights in the counterbalance bag. Now I've got an example here with the braid has been made very tightly, and if I hold it up straight in front of me, you can see that it holds firm. Now if I compare that with this other braid that I've got here and hold this one up, you can see that the tension doesn't support the braid. It's a very loose braid, so I use more counterbalance weight in this to make this braid than I did with the other one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up the braid with that in mind. We've already established that we're going to make a braid with 14 ounces of weight, and I'm going to put through the knitting needle that I've got here, through between the two ties that we made when we walked up. And you can see I'm using a knitting needle which has got a point on either end. I prefer that because for 2 reasons. One, that it fits snugly on the underside of the Maru Dai, and also it hasn't got a knob on one end. That means I can slip it out either with my left or right hand as I'm working. I'm now going to put the warp down through the centre hole of the Maru Dai so that the knitting needle will clamp tight underneath. There we are. I put the needle under there. I'm pulling against it, so I've now got tension. I'm now going to move the Maru Dai away from me so that I've got the whole warp under tension, the full length of it. When you're making a warp to dress the Maru Dai like this, you mustn't let it be loose like this, because when you're winding on, the threads will become all floppy. You've got to do it when it's all taut and straight. When we prepared the warp, we twined off each of the individual threads for the bobbin, and you can see how you remember we had it a certain distance from the tassel binding. Well, we can see very clearly how these threads fall within our vision, and we can separate the warps quite easily by just tugging them out. What you mustn't do is pull this warp through here like this, because 10 to 1 all the threads down here are going to grip together and tangle. So what I'm going to do is loosen off the white thread here like that and pull out the first warp. Now I'm now going to put a bobbin on that, and before I do that I'm just going to smooth those threads out a bit towards me and select my first bobbin which I got to hand. And it's important that you have things in hand. Now, if you're in the kitchen and you've got your hands in the dough, you don't want to be reaching across the counter with sticky hands to get up the thing that you've missed putting beside you. So have your bobbins handy. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold the bobbin tie across my fingers of my left hand. With my right hand I'm holding the tail of the warp thread, and I'm now going to use my index finger on my left hand to flick the short tail over like that and create a loop. Now I don't want to let go of that tail. I want to reach through that loop with my finger and my thumb and catch part of that tail and pull it through so there's a loop like that. Then I'm going to pull it down tight onto the bobbin tie, and that's secure. If you want to just tug it a bit further and make it tighter, that's fine. Now I'm going to take the bobbin and wind the bobbin tie on there, making sure that the thread is running on the underside of the bobbin, like this. And I'm going to roll it on tight. And if you've got a long, long warp, you'd sort of roll it on like you would do the way that you do on a sewing machine, where the thread goes backwards and forwards. But we've only got a short warp here. Now I'm now going to put a slipping hitch onto this bobbin, and I'm going to use my thumb and my finger to create a loop. And I'm going to let the bobbin go slightly underneath my thumb and make the loop like this and catch it onto the bobbin, so you can see the loop forming over the thread, and it comes down like that. Now that slipping hitch I pull tight, and that will be let down now to where that tie is on the leg. I'm now going to roll on the remaining 7 bobbins. Now we've prepared all the bobbins and we've got them all hanging here, ready to be put in position according to the setting up diagram that we have. Well, I'm going to choose to place the green threads as the B threads, and I'm going to put them to the side here. And I'm going to put 2 blue threads to the top of the Maru Dai, farthest away from me, and I'll leave the 2 southern ones here. Now all that remains for me is to pick up the weights and place them in the counterbalance bag, like this. And then I'm going to tie a lark's head knot in the counterbalance bag tie. So I'm going to form that loop. Again, the lark's head knot. Now I'm going to hold the bag in my palm. It gives me better control like that. And now I'm going to reach underneath the Maru Dai, pull down the threads and insert the tassel end through the lark's head knot, moving that up to where the knitting needle is. Remove the knitting needle and then tighten the lark's head knot between those 2 ties that we did for the knitting needle right at the beginning, and then it's now ready to begin braiding. For all the bobbins you set up on the Maru Dai, whether it's 8 or 16 or 24, it would be exactly the same as we've done here. Okay, we're all set up and ready to braid. Now, before you even think about braiding, get your body in the correct position in relation to what you're going to do. Now, it's important you don't put the tension into you put it into your braid. And this is where a lot of people fall down because they don't get themselves set up properly. So whatever size Maru Dai you're using, have your elbows in at the side of your body here, and your fingertips should be level with the center of the hole. The top of the Maru Dai should be level with the sternum. Now this allows you to move in either way round the Maru Dai with the least tension in your shoulders, because it's across the chest and the back of the shoulders here that you get the tension. Typists used to get it in the old days when they used to type. Computer operators get it too. Now, The way I work here, I can sit on my feet for about an hour, and I'm quite happy to do that. Lots of people, of course, can't. So there are alternative ways to sit. Now, however you choose to sit, you've still got to get this relationship between the level here and the fingertip point. So I'm now going to just move that out of the way and switch in here, this stool I've got at the side, and put my legs underneath, so I'm sitting in it. And that's really comfortable. So this is another way that I actually work at home. So that I've got the Maru Dai there, and again I'm moving my fingertips so that they're level, and it's level here. So I can then again move around here without any effort at all. If you don't have a little stool and you can't sit on your feet, the next thing we'll do is sit in a chair. We've now raised the Maru Dai onto a small pink object here. These objects can be a small table, it could be a crate, a cardboard box, whatever brings the Maru Dai up to a height that's level with your sternum. And so I've tested this so my finger points are level with the center hole, and here I am again in the freedom to be able to move around the side of the Maru Dai. Now if you have it too low, what you're going to do is slouch over it, and you won't be able to breathe properly. So it's important you keep a straight back. If it's too high, your arms are going to be up here somewhere working, and it's going to put a lot of tension into your arms and your shoulder joints. As well as sitting in a chair or kneeling, of course you can stand it on a table and work, and you've again got to make sure it's at the correct height. And now we're ready to make some braids. Before we start moving the bobbins on the Maru Dai, let's have a look at the chart so we can see clearly what the moves are going to be. And the moves that are flowing from south to north are the identical moves that flow from east to west. And here we can see the arrow moving away from this bobbin from the left-hand side at the bottom to the top left, and then we have the one at the right top moving to the bottom right. So I'll do that on the Maru Dai so you can see how it goes. Here I'm picking up the bottom left-hand thread and I'm moving it to the top left. And as you can see, I've now got 3 bobbins, and I'm now going to pick up the top right and bring it to the bottom right. So that would complete the move from south to north. Now we're going to move the bobbins from east to west. And this lower one moves across to the bottom here of this pair. And then when we've got 3 bobbins, this one will come across and come to the top here. So let me do that in practice. But when I do it in practice, I'm going to, in fact, cross my hands. And this is the bobbin that moves across like this and comes to the top. And this is the one that moves across and comes to the bottom. And that completes the sequence. So I'm picking up the bobbin that's furthest away from me on my thumb, and the bobbins that's near me on the left-hand side, so there's the top right on my thumb, bottom left on my palm. I'm now going to move my right hand, so I then transfer the thread across the palm. So by the time it comes to the bottom here, it's on the palm, and this will move across like that, and then go onto my thumb, and then I adjust the position and put them back where they started. And now I'm going to move the east and west threads. My thumb comes through under the bobbin thread like that. That will come round, and as I move, see how I'm bringing my hand round like that. It then comes onto the palm and is placed there, and this one starting off on the palm, this one comes round onto my thumb, and I let it down there, and again adjusting it. And so the braiding continues with these 2 moves, like this. And you build up a very good rhythm on this braid. And so it's a nice one to begin to learn on. And here we go, making the braid, simple move like this. Now when you're moving the threads, what you're doing is relating the weight of the bobbin, which is 70 grams, against the counterbalance bag, And I'm looking down the centre of the Maru Dai as I'm working, and I'm seeing that in relation to how far it hangs down the hole. Now I can judge that from having made a lot of braids, the sort of braid that's going to come out. And this braid's going to be quite soft because of the weight I've got in the counterbalance bag. And as I work, I do this. Now, what I haven't told you is that the top of the Maru Dai is called kagami, and that means mirror. And the mirror is a reflection of how you make the braid. So it's a reflection of you and the sort of braid that comes out underneath. And the other thing that happens is that the grain of the Maru Dai should be running across you. So it's running horizontal and not vertical, and the base grain should be exactly the same. So that when you're moving these east-west threads, you're flowing with the river, and when you're moving the south-north threads, you're crossing the river. Now the other thing about the braids is to know something about the structure. Now people say to me, oh, how do you know where you start if you've left it alone to answer the phone or whatever? Well, you can see that the blue thread in fact is crossing over the greens. That tells you it's the last thread that you've done. And I can also see that this one, as it comes over here, is in fact higher in the structure of the braid, and so is this one, and these therefore are lower in the structure of the braid. So this is the lower thread and this is the upper thread. And it's the lower thread you move when you're making a braid. There are exceptions to that, but 90%, 99% are going to be the lower thread that you move. If you were to move the upper thread by mistake, what would happen is that the move after that, you'd get a long floating stitch on the side of the braid. So not only do you have to make the braid and be aware of what's coming outside, you've got to be aware of just checking your braid now and again, just looking at it to see that you don't have any floating threads. So you're very much in charge of what's going on. The other thing I've got to watch as I make the braid is that the bobbins will get shorter and come nearer the top, and the counterweight bag will lower down, and we don't want it to touch the base. I'm just going to move the Maru Dai away from me a little way, like that, and I'm going to lower these bobbins down to this mark that's on the leg. And I do that by taking the bobbin, and I've got this loop here away from me, so it's turning on the other side of the thread, and I loosen it off a bit, and this bobbin will run down the thread like that until I've got it to that level. Then I pull back on the thread just to tighten it, and then make them all the same height. So I do the two on the south side nearest me first, then I'll take one of the braids from the side and lower that down to the same level. It's important you keep all your bobbins at the same height. If you don't, what will happen if this bobbin that was in fact down here, as they move, they would tangle. And you know, that just is irritating for that to happen. So I'll just reset that to the correct height. And now do this side, and then finally I'll do the bobbins on the north. Now what I normally do is that I would adjust the bag, it's getting near to the bottom, and I hold the bag in the palm of my hand, but before I move it, I want my knitting needle, and I'm going to place it underneath the Maru Dai top, but crossing the thread, so that it's going to, when I release the tension here, the whole braid will be held still, it won't move. So now I can catch that in the palm of my hand, release the thread of the lark's head knot and slip it up the braid. Now remember I talked about the thickness of the thread here. If in fact that was a very fine thread on the counterbalance bag, it would bite into the braid, and also it's very hard to unpick that lark's head knot as you're working, so a thicker thread, a soft thread, works very well and makes it easy. It's all sort of towards hassle-free braiding. Remember we've been going around the Maru Dai and I've said keep the positions at north and south and east and west. But in fact, as you get more accustomed to working, what you can do is let the threads walk round the Maru Dai. So that as you work, try and keep the spacing 1 finger width apart, so That takes a little practice. And you'll find as the braid walks around, you see how it's moving one space at a time as we move around. That also means you're going to have to change your hand positions now and again. So here we go. And now it's getting a bit awkward for me to reach over here. I'll just about do that one. And this one's coming round. So this time I'm going to move the green ones as if they were at north and south. So they're going to come across like that. And soon the blue ones will be in the position where I'm going to have to now reach across and move them like that. So that's what you do to sort of, as you work and get longer. Now you can see that the end of the braid is coming here. Now look, this is where the leader cord, your bobbin tie comes in. It allows you to use that thread, and you can use it until it comes right down in the centre as near as you can to the hole. Before I take this braid off the Maru Dai, I've now made the full length, and here's the tassel, because we're making a tassel braid. So I've allowed that as a finish. I've got to tie it off underneath, and I'm going to do this with this white cotton again. And I'm just going to fold that in half, and I'm going to put a lark's head on underneath. So I'm going right underneath to the last piece of braiding, last point of braiding there, tying a lark's head knot tight on there, and just now with the two threads forming a half hitch on there and pulling that up tight. Now I'm just going to pick this up so you can see what I've done underneath. And just move those out the way. Now here's the tie. It was tied with the lark's head knot, and then I put the half hitch on under there. So I'm going to lower those down again, put those back in position. Now I'm going to take the braid off the Maru Dai, but before I do so, I'm going to put this knitting needle through underneath the Maru Dai top, so that it was going to stop that threads moving. And I'm going to drop the counterbalance bag down a little so it's almost touching the base. And then I'm going to release the bobbins by pulling the tail on the warp thread like that and releasing it so the bobbin tie comes off. I do that diagonally opposite on each side. Had I just worked one side like this and did the two here and the two here, the likelihood of the rest would just swish off and the whole braid gets lost. That's the importance of tying it off underneath. So it's sort of belt and braces job. Now I'm going to pull this tie and this one, again diagonally opposite, and then take out the remaining two green ones, like that, and then the blue one here, and then the last blue one. And there it's all gone down through the centre. What I have to do now is to remove the counterbalance bag. I'll take that off this way. And here we've got our finished braid. There's the original tassel tie. Here's the one that was at the end. And I will then now remove those ties when I do the finishing off. Now on my knee here I have the braid that we started off, which I referred to and said I was going to make another sample, and this is the one we just finished. Now let me just flex this one, because remember I said I wanted to test this sample out to see what the extra weight would do. Well, this one's really got a lot of sponginess in it, so that's quite very soft and quite limp. And then if we pull this one, it doesn't pull quite as much, so it's been done with less weight in the counterbalance bag and then therefore tighter. So I'm just going to put this to one side, and I'm going to finish off this braid that we've taken off the Maru Dai. I'm just going to slide down this temporary tie away from the braided part, just a little way, like that. And then I'm going to thread this needle in, which I've pre-threaded, and I'm going to sew it through the braid. Now remember I showed you a wrap loop when I was warping up. This is the way you should finish off your braid so that the wrapping does not pull off the braid. So having sewing it in, I've really fastened it. Now I'm going to wrap it round the braid a few times. I'm going to come round once, twice, 3 times, and then I'm going to put a half hitch to secure it while I then rethread the needle and do some more sewing. So there's the half hitch coming into position, and I pull that tight. Right, so I've secured that. Now I've got to put the needle back on. And what I'm going to do now is to sew this way, not through the braid. I'm going to catch into the braid a bit and then come down underneath the wrapping. And I put one stitch in like that, and a second one. And the third one, I'm going to come through and sew through to the other side of the braid so it comes out here underneath the wrapping, so I can do the same thing on the other side of the braid. And that really secures the wrapping to the braid. That's one and two. And the last one. And this, they will then come down as a loose thread and join the tassel. That means I can remove this altogether. I'll use a seam ripper for this and get under that there and just cut through and remove that. Now this end of the braid is secure. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to smooth that down a bit. I'm going to cut the tassel to length. And I've got a board here which I'm going to place it on. And I'm going to use this tracing paper that I have. And I want to decide how long I want my tassel. So I'm going to say I want it about that long. It feels right in proportion to the braid. And I'm going to wrap it like this. And this is a great way. One of the things you do when you've got a tassel like this and you just cut through it without doing this, you can never get the threads all the same length. But this one allows you to just cut through the paper, and when you take it out, all your tassel lengths are the same length like that. And that's a great tip. And there I'll do the other end. And I'll cut straight through this tie here. Now this went on very tightly, so I've got to snug that seam ripper under there and make sure I don't catch the threads, and undo it. So, got that. Now that means I've released that one, and I'm going to see if I can pull this one down out of the way. I can just do that. It needs a bit of tug. And then I'll finish off with this other piece of thread I've got here. Sewing that on. Sewing through the braid again. Remember, we put the short end down with the tassel, and then we wrapped round here once, twice, 3 times. Then we put the half hitch in. Slide that down and tighten it up over the join like that. And then put the needle back on. I always use needles with big eyes. I'm not very good at threading needles. And we stitch that under there. And that's twice through. This gives a very neat finish. It's a sort of secretive finish. Now the third one I stitched through, if you remember, I came through to the bottom of the wrapping on the other side, so I can repeat that process. Now I can remove the last of the temporary ties. And this time I smooth it down. I like to make my tassels asymmetrical. I don't like them to be the same length. And then cut through again. And there we have our finished braid. If we put it alongside the other one, you'll see that it's very similar. Now, having done all the finishing, we've got to the end of the project, and we need now to record what we've done. And for that purpose, we have a record sheet. We're now going to look at the second warp we prepared earlier on, and in fact I've set it up on the Maru Dai already. And how I set it up was, I'm going to show you on this other warp I've got here, which has been prepared in exactly the same way, is that where my thumb is, we tied a lark's head knot on the warp, and there's the overhand knot here, this big one here. So I would put the needle through, and then it would go down through the hole in the centre of the Maru Dai like we did before, and then I would put the bobbins on. Now, I've already set it up like that, so I just wanted to remind you how we would do it. So I'll just put this out of the way. Now, before we start moving the threads again, I want you to have a look at the chart here. The two things, this is the braid that we're about to make, and you can see these have got multiple ends on them, whereas the warp that's on the Maru Dai has just got one end. And again, we're going to move the bottom left-hand bobbin to the top left, and then we'll have 3 bobbins there. So if I do that here on the Maru Dai, and come up here and do that. So this is the bottom left-hand thread on the Maru Dai that's coming across to the top. Right. And then we're going to look back at the chart, and you can see here that we've got the top right bobbin coming to the bottom right here. Now, I'll do that on the Maru Dai, and do that like this, and then I would position them so they're north and south. Whereas the first move I refer to on step 1 is clockwise. The threads are moving in a direction like this. When we look at the movement here, in fact the movement is counterclockwise. So this top bobbin will move across in a counterclockwise direction, and this one will come round in this direction and change. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. First of all, this top thread will come this way, and you can see if this was a hand on a clock, it would be coming round and be placed there, and then this one would come round this way in a counterclockwise movement. So the north and south moves we've been making are identical to the first braid. So on the thumb, across the palm, turning, here you can see the clockwise motion, coming round and placing them next to the partner thread. But this time, what we've got to do is reaching with the palm, so your right hand comes through and has the thread here, and your left hand comes over and the thumb comes under the thread like that. And now you turn counterclockwise. You don't cross over, you keep the threads parallel, so they stay there. And that's the same here. It's a common mistake happens when you begin. You often will do this and cross the threads. Now you don't cross the threads as you work, you always keep them parallel. So I'm going to make those 2 moves, and I have to position the threads here as I'm working. And I can't let them walk around the top of the Maru Dai like I did before, because they just bump into each other because they're travelling in opposite directions. Here we have the movements like this, clockwise and counterclock. And again, as I bring my hand round, this one comes onto the palm and this one comes onto the thumb like that. And that's what happens here too. Palm, thumb, as it comes round, it comes onto the palm, this one comes onto the thumb, and it allows you to position them. I'll just work a little of the braid, and because we're doing this, we're getting a little square braid with the stitches laying in the opposite direction, and that's happening because we're doing it in the clockwise and counterclockwise way. Now, I've been deliberately going around this to illustrate the clockwise direction, but when I'm working, I actually do this. I come straight over like that with that move, and this one would come straight over like this. And that's a better way to do it. Now, remember we talked about counterbalance bags and bobbin weight. They interact together. So the two things enacting together, I'm just going to lift this braid up so you can see what's beginning to happen. Can you see that? And you can see the sort of nice sort of straight braid you're getting. But the other ingredient to making a braid and tension is you. Now you know that perhaps you do know, when you knit, some people knit quite loosely and some quite tight. So you have to find out how it is that you lift the bobbins. And the important thing is that when you lift the bobbins, you let them slide. You don't pinch the threads with your finger and thumb, because that's pulling against the center. So you let them slide and glide across as you pick up and put down. I'm going to continue making this braid until I've come to the end, and then I'm going to take it off, and then I'll show you how to finish off the blunt end. The tassel end, you saw how we did that for the first project, and that would be finished in the same way. But I'll show you how to deal with the blunt end, to leave it blunt or to use it as the sample. We're now going to finish off our second project. And I want to show you here, before I finish off the blunt end, which is at this end, is if we look down the braid here and follow it down like this, you'll see that we've got a couple of glitches. There's a long stitch there, and there's another one there, and there's an even longer one there. Now this shows you what happens when you move the wrong thread. Now if you can imagine you've got two bobbins at the north and two bobbins at the south, you were to lift up the top right one and the bottom left one, and as you swing them round, you're going to place them parallel to the partner. But if you cross them over, this is when the trouble starts. So you get this floating stitch appear on the edge of the braid. Now what do you do about that? How do you go backwards? Now the other thing I'd remind you of is, if you're looking down the center hole at what's happening to your braid, just glancing down there occasionally, you'll pick it up. You'll pick up this mistake before it gets too far down the braid. You don't want to spend like an hour braiding something and then at the end you think, oh my goodness, I've made a mistake, and you've got to go back that far. So what you do is you keep an eye on it, and then what you do is slowly undo the braid, go in the opposite direction, so you can slowly go back until you find that there's two long stitches, and you can then go back just a bit beyond that, because it often doesn't just undo the mistake to go back to where that float is. It's better to go just a bit beyond that, and then you can start going forward again. And to make this into a sample, what I do is tie another overhand knot in here and slip it onto the ring, and that would be a permanent record, and then I put a swing tag on the end, so there it would be part of a collection. But today I'm not going to do that as a sample. When we prepared the warp for this braid, we tied off the blunt end at post B with a lark's head knot. And this is the lark's head knot that's here. Now, apart from sort of using it secure as samples, what we can do is release it completely and remove it. But we've got to be very careful here, because what we're going to do is take it right off and unloosen that without pulling the loop of the lark's head knot through. So there's the loop of the lark's head knot here. Now, to pull that out, we'd lose this and it will come sort of loose and lumpy. So what I'm going to do is use this green thread, and I'm going to thread it through the loop, and so I'll be pulling the green thread into the braid to replace the yellow loop. I'm going to separate the thread into two threads, so I've got a loop hanging on to the yellow loop. So there's the green loop here, look, like that, hanging on to the yellow loop. I'm going to ease that out through the braid, so I'm now pulling the green thread through. Again, I'm going to separate the green threads like that and pull one of them through like that, and that releases and gets rid of the yellow tie that we put on at post B. Now I'm left with this thread. Now what I'm going to do is middle that so the two green ends are together, and I'm going to put them both onto a needle. So I've threaded them onto the needle, and again what I'm going to do is hold the braid under tension. I'm going to hold it on between my knees like that, and I'm going to stitch through the loop that was there. And do that several times. That's good. Now I'll lose these threads by sewing them down inside the braid. Thimble's a good idea now, and I don't have one to hand. So I'm just going to put that down there, what I'll do there. So I've got my blunt end, and I'll take my scissors and I'll snip it off at this point. And so the threads are secure, I got my blunt end, and there's my braid finished. This braid that is set up is for our third project, and it's the braid where we're going to have a braided loop. And this is the braided loop. I'll remind you of what it looks like. The first thing we have to do is make this loop, and I want to show you how I set it up. Here we have the two ties that we originally put on, which the knitting needle would have gone through, and so the bobbins could be put on. And then we had the rest of the half of the warp here. So we started the braid just off-center, so we'd have enough to make the loop with this part of the braid, so it'd then be half the braid when it was evened out. So I'm just going to secure this braid under here while I put the counterbalance bag on. And this counterbalance bag will go on this long trailing warp, which will come into operation when we do the main braid. I'll just slip that up there and put it onto the two ties there, and then I can begin to make the braid. Now before I begin to make the braid, I'm going to arrange the threads so they're like this. Before we move the bobbins on the Maru Dai, let's have a look at the chart and see what we've got here. Let's have a look at the moves. We've got two steps. Step one, where the moves are going clockwise around the periphery of the Maru Dai, and on step two, they go the opposite way. They're going counterclockwise. You remember we met that in the last braid. Now, what we're doing here is this specific instruction here to pick up this first thread with the right hand, because it's going to move in this direction, and this is going to be the left hand. So what we've in fact got is two moves that are clockwise and two moves that are counterclockwise. I think the best way for me to do that now and show you on the Maru Dai itself. Here's the right hand picking up this thread here. Now this is a different hand move. I'm going to pick this up on my index finger, and I'm going to cross the thread. So I've got three threads at the east and west. And then I'm going to pick up the center thread and go clockwise for the second move. Now you can see how the threads are going round the outside of the Maru Dai. They're not crossing over the surface. This, in fact, is the same as a maypole dance. So here we're picking up the threads on the index finger, jumping over. Now what I do here is to let it fall onto the second finger, which leaves my index finger 3 to pick up this middle thread and place the other one in position. And here we come again, picking up with the index finger, dropping onto the second finger, picking up the center thread, one in the middle, putting your first threads in position, and then coming round. And you gradually build up a rhythm. This is a wonderful braid to build up a rhythm for. And so we go round. You can sing nursery rhymes to this, you know, like round and round, in and out the dusty bluebells or something. And we're making this. Now what we're doing first of all, I remind you, we're making the loop, so we don't want to make this braid very long. And I'm going to complete this loop about an inch and a half, and I'll check it now and again to see how long it is and see how it feels to me. And when I came to make the large braid, I'll just recap on all this because I'll be making the same braid, but I'll have two ends of bobbin. Whereas now I've only got one end of bobbin. This is when braiding becomes a meditation. It's just such a nice rhythmic thing to do. It's very relaxing. Now let's see how far we've got. There's the loop. I think that that's a big enough loop. And then I'm going to tie it off like we would do if we were finishing a braid. Now I've got some white cotton here, which, remember what I did? I made a lark's head knot with this underneath, up tight. Now I've got to put this one on tight. I don't want it to come undone at all. So I put the lark's head knot there and pulling it really tight. And now I'm going to put a half hitch on there as well. Slip that up the braid and pull that tight. Now I'm going to take the bobbins off, and I'll take them off slipping the ends out of the bobbin ties, and I'll take them off diagonally opposite each other. Now I'm noticing as I'm working that my counterbalance bag is quite near the base, and that's near enough. You don't want it high, otherwise it starts pulling the bobbins up on the outside here before you've released them all. And here's the last bobbin released. There we are. So here's the tie. I'll release the counterbalance bag and we'll have a look at what we've got. So here we are. Here's the loop, like that. And then what these will become is the main braid. Now before we can make the main braid, I'm going to slip down that tie off the braid and the same on this side. And there we are. And now I've got to secure those together so it's tight. Now what I'm going to do is, I've got some yellow thread, and I'm going to use a different colour thread so it's a contrast and you can see what's happening. I'm going to thread that onto the needle, and what I do is to stitch through the braid. Right. Now I've got the braiding there and the braiding there together, and I'm going to push the needle through the braiding like that. And I want these not to have a short and long end, I want these to be equal, so I'm going to fold them in half like that to make sure they're about the same length. And keep one end out of the way, and I'm going to wrap here once, and I'm pulling this tight, very tight. And the third one, I don't want lots and lots of wrapping, I'm going to put on here a half hitch. Like that. I'm then going to open the loop like that, and I'm going to thread this yellow thread through the loop one way, and the other end's going to come the other way, threading through like that on one side. Now turn it round and push the thread through on this side. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is to tie a square knot under the wrapping. So that's really going to secure the loop in one place. So I'm going to put that down the hole, and I'm going to use my knitting needle to pull against that. So I can now tie my square knot. So I put the knitting needle through the loop, and that holds it in place while I'm doing this. And I keep it under tension so the needle won't drop out. And then the square knot comes down on top of that. Right, so now we've secured the loop together, I can pull down and get rid of the tie off the end on both sides. Yet again going to come through with these yellow threads through the loop one way and then through the other way. So I'm now going to tie an overhand knot in here, not too far away from the loop. This will be where I'm going to eventually put the S-hook on, and the S-hook will carry the weight of the counterbalance. Now, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to use the knitting needle to put it through this loop and place it down the center hole here like that, and that will be something for me to pull against under tension. I'm now going to move the Maru Dai away from me. So remember what I said, don't have your threads slack. So now they are here under tension, and I'm going to pick up the first bobbin and select 2 threads. And I try to select them in some sort of sequence so they don't cross over at the top. And I'll put the bobbins on. And remember how I did this with the thread underneath, coming up here, finger and thumb, and there we are, there's the first one on. And so I'll do each of these and get them on. You can now see that we have all the bobbins assembled to the warp, and now we have 2 threads to each bobbin. So where we folded it, where we were making the loop, we had one long half of the warp out of the way, and we only had one end of bobbin. Now we've got 2. Now what I've done is attached the yellow cord here to the knitting needle, which is holding it tight underneath. And I'm now going to attach the S-hook. And I'm going to reach underneath and hook that into the yellow cord. Like that. Now I'm going to now attach the counterbalance bag to the S-hook, and I don't want a long loop this time, so I'm going to shorten it by pulling out both sides of the loop on the counterbalance bag like that. And then I'm going to reach underneath with the bag and hook it onto the S-hook, and that will take the weight. I can now pull my bobbins round and position them, at the same time releasing the needle underneath here and arrange the threads. So I'm trying to be sympathetic to the structure, and I've got 2 that way and 2 that way. Now here's my warp spread out, and I'm going to make exactly the same braid. I'm just going to ease this nearer to myself. That's it, so I've got it in correct position. And I'm going to make the same braid as I did for the loop. And I'm coming round, lifting over, picking up the middle thread, the important thing is the way you pick it up. The index finger coming round, dropping onto the second finger, picking up the middle thread, placing the original one there, and back. And you're doing 2 moves clockwise and 2 moves counterclockwise. And I'll continue doing this braid for a little while, and you'll see the difference with the solid braid now attached to the loop. If I just lift this up, you'll be able to see the main braid attached to the loop. Here we are, like that. Now I'll continue making this braid until I come to the end. What I'll do then is finish it off with a tassel like we did on the first braid. And then what I would do is sew the yellow thread down into the braid and lose the ends. We now come to the fourth warp, which we prepared earlier. And this is the one with the wrap loop. You remember the yellow wrap loop I did and how I interlaced the threads together? Well, now what I'm going to do here is to pick up the knitting needle, put it through the loop, and pass that down through the centre hole of the Maru Dai and affix the bobbins. So I'm putting that under tension. That's held because it's interlaced. I'm now going to move the Maru Dai away from me. Under tension while I put the bobbins on. Well, this is the big thick yarn, which is a rug yarn that I found, and it's going to fill the bobbin up quite substantially. So I'm winding up very tight, so it'll be held like that. And loosen it down to that point. And there we are. Now I've arranged these threads in the order in which they're going to be put according to the setting up diagram. Now that I have the bobbins attached to the warp and I have an S-hook hooked onto the yellow wrapping, I can now attach the counterbalance bag. I'm going to pick that up, and I'm leaving a long loop on that this time, and I'm going to hook the thread through onto the S-hook like that and let it pull the threads down. Now I arranged the interlacing so that I would in fact be able to relate this directly to the setting up pattern. So if we have a look at the setting up pattern down here, we've got the A threads in quite a different position to what we've previously been setting up. We've got two on the north side, and then look, we've got one either side here, and the reciprocal B threads are interlaced with those. Now that's exactly the way that I've arranged them. So the pink threads are the A threads, and I'm going to put those in position here. These A threads are already in position, as are these Bs, and I'm going to slide these Bs into position like that. Now that means I can begin to look at the steps to make this braid. Now this braid has 4 steps, and I'd like to go through with you what they are. You can see on step 1 and step 2 there's numbers at the bottom and at the top. And that means you're going to pick up this bobbin first and then this bobbin second and move them to the position shown. And then step 2, it's the other way round. Look, the first bobbin goes from the right-hand side, where the 2 goes from the left-hand side. And then step 3, you can see when the bobbins have been placed in position, 2 come to the bottom, and then 2 come to the top. And as I work, I'll show you an adjustment move as I work, and a tensioning move, how to keep the edges of the braid straight. Now this is number 1 thread, and you can see I'm picking up with my right hand. And number 2, I'm going underneath that and picking up with my left hand, and those 2 bobbins are coming to this position. This is number 1 bobbin, which I'm now reversing and picking up my left hand, going underneath, picking up my right, and they come to here. Step 3 is these 2 bobbins lift up, and I'm going to bring them up towards the centre. That's a tensioning move, and bring them down like this. And then the 2 A threads come up like that and go to the top. So there's the 4 steps. Now you can see that these 2 bobbins are wider than those 2, and I need to have them in this position. So I do the adjustment as I work like this. Pick them up, position them. Move these, pick them up, position them. Then pick these 2 up, tension them like that and bring them to the bottom, and these 2 come to the top. So that you get a nice rhythm like that. These 2 come to the bottom, these 2 come to the top. This is another braid with it's got a very good rhythm to it. Now the bobbins have come near the top. Now I never let my bobbins come any closer than 2 fingers here. If in fact you start letting your bobbins come further up like this, you alter the tension in the centre of the braid, because the pull on it is much tighter. So I'm going to let the bobbins down, and I'm also going to do something about the counterbalance bag. So the first thing I'm going to do is to put in my knitting needle through the structure of the braid to secure it. And this time I'm now going to ignore the S-hook, and I'm going to put a lark's head loop into the bag like I've done before. And there we are. Hold it in my palm, and I'm going to thread up to the braid and secure it on the braid, like that. Now I can lengthen the bobbins. And they're coming down to that marker. Now I'm ready to continue, and don't forget to take your knitting needle out. You don't want that as part of the structure. So now I'm going to begin again. When I've made a little more, I'll show you what it looks like. Let's have a look at the braid we've been making. I'll just hold this up so you can see. Now this is one side, and if I twist it round, you'll see what's on the other side. And that's a nice pattern as well. Now if we compare this braid with this little one that we began with here, you can see it's the same braid, but gosh, what a difference in the size. Now I'm going to finish this braid off with a tassel, like I've shown you before. When I have finished making a braid, whether it's a flat one or a round one, or whether it's got tassels on the end or loops, I always steam the braid to relax it, and I pass it over the jet of steam coming from this kettle. And I would caution you, you must take very great care how you do this not to burn yourself. And so I'm always very, very careful. You can see how the care I'm taking not to get my hands near. I'm using this knitting needle I have to pass the thread over, and it's not staying there very, very long. It's just enough to relax the threads. And I'll pass the whole length of braid through the steam. And then when I get to the end, I don't try and do the end with my fingers. I turn it round and steam it like this. And last of all, I'll do this tassel, and I want the steam to soak into that tassel. I'll jiggle it to help it do that, and then I'll stroke the tassel down, and yes, that feels good. That's going to come out very nice and straight. And that's how I steam the braids. Now here's the final step of finishing off your braid. Having steamed it, I'm now going to roll it. And I've chosen a copy of my own book, which has got a nice rough surface. And I'm very lucky today to have a piece of canvas here, which has also got a nice grain to it. Normally I'd use 2 books. So I'm going to place my book on top of the braid like that and roll it backwards and forwards like this, and then go to the other length of the braid and do this again. Doesn't that look beautiful? It's all nice and even and smooth, and that's a way of sort of sorting out the little glitches and inconsistencies you might make when you're braiding. Now I'm now going to show you what I do with a flat braid. I'm going to remove that, put my book down, and pick up a rolling pin. Now I've got 2 rolling pins, one for my braids and one for my cooking. So what I do is I roll my flat braids like this. It's as simple as that, and it just finishes it off. And there we are. There's the flat braid finished. There's so many things you can do with braids. Just have a look at what we've got here. These are all works that have been lent to me to show you and share with you. There's works by Brenda Osborne from America, Carol McAllister from England, Terry Flynn from America, and a couple of my pieces in there too. These are braids for bags and tassels and sachets, and the braids can be used as units for cushions and interior designs and lots of exciting things here. This is the work of Jenny Parry from England. There's Pernilla de Boer from Denmark and Richard Sutherland from America. And these are beautiful pieces. There's a space-dyed silk here just in one length. And you can see how the colour varies so much. And here we have a necklace, a neck piece that's been made and knotted together, and it makes a wonderful piece. This is by Carol Franklin from America. And I did the space-dyed one. This is a vest which has been hand-woven, and it has edging the whole vest a 24-strand braid with chenille and lurex thread to match the jacket itself. This was made by Terry Flynn from America. And Bev Acorn made this wonderful chenille bag and then braided a chenille spiral braid with gold to go with it. And this jacket was made by Terry Flynn. She's hand-dyed the yarn which the jacket was made from and hand-dyed the lining. And we do a joint project here. I made the braids to go with the jacket. The braid for this jacket was made on the tackadai. And this is a joint project between Terry Flynn from America and myself. Terry made the chenille jacket and picked up the pattern in the tackadai braid that I've got here with the shadow pattern in stripes. And I'd like to show you that the inside of the braid, in fact, is a different colourway. The lining was hand-dyed to shine out from the black. And I would like to point out that Kumihimo is not just Maru Dai. You have three other pieces of equipment. You have kakadai, which is a square top piece of equipment where the braid grows upwards, an ayatakadai piece of equipment which makes twine structures, very much like tablet weaving. And here we have a tackadai with Richard Sutherland from America making these flat braids. He's making a log cabin design, a single braid. And I can make flat braids on the Maru Dai as well. I won't say goodbye, but cheerio and happy braiding.